Canadian Prepper here, back again with the daily dose of doom and gloom. I hope you guys have been keeping well, taking care of your mind and body, and prepping for times to get hard. Because if you cannot find a way to make things work while we're in the twilight of Western civilization, then my friends, how the hell are you going to manage to keep it together when things really start to fall apart, like it's looking as they very well may in the weeks ahead? Now, if you're new to the channel, prepare to be traumatized, to say the least, because I'm going to take you around the world and show you how things are just culminating into one giant crap storm. Isn't that fun? And yes, you guessed it, I'm not that guy that you invite to parties, at least not anymore. So let's just take a look at what's going on here. We have the IMF saying, hey, yeah, we probably should prepare for World War III in a roundabout way. They said we need to prepare for the unthinkable after COVID and the situation in Ukraine. We have the Ukrainians saying we got a surprise for Mr. Vladimir on the 23rd and 24th. Apparently, that's when they're telegraphing that the Russians are going to invade and do a massive, big invasion. We already know they already invaded. They're going to do their big, long-anticipated offensive. Victoria Nuland is saying, you know what, just start firing missiles at Crimea. Let's just get this World War III thing started. We have the Russians responding and saying if Kiev strikes Crimea, all of Ukraine is going to be on fire. So we got some critical turning points coming next week. Many people think that Putin is going to announce an intensification of the conflict and a whole lot more. We got Belarus in there like a dirty shirt. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, we got the WHO convening an urgent meeting over the Marburg virus. Apparently, this has been spreading to multiple countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, has a kill rate of 88%. I believe the incubation period is around 5 days or so. So it does have the potential to spread. And if that thing spreads or gets airborne or some craziness like that, then who knows? I mean, we're probably all screwed. We're probably all screwed anyways, but hey, we're here for a short time, not a long, or no, we're here for a good time, not a long time, right? Isn't that how the song goes? So, we're on borrowed time anyways, guys. You know what, in all seriousness, don't let this stuff keep you up at night. It's outside of a lot of our control. The best thing you can do is what you're doing, and that's prepping. I'm just here to keep it real with you, all right? We have a mass death of sea lions from bird flu, suggesting the virus might be spreading between mammals in the wild. Now recall, just a few weeks ago, I was talking about this, and I said that what's happening is that wild birds are catching this. They're dropping dead from the sky. The fox or the coyote, the bears, the wolves, they come by. They're like, free lunch. So they gobble up this saturated carcass filled to the brim with virus. The more mammals that get this virus, that consume these dead birds that are dropping from the sky, the greater the likelihood that it's going to be transmissible within that species. Once it makes the jump to one mammal, it's more likely to jump to other mammals, because recall, it's the avian flu, not the mammalian flu. Once it makes that jump, then the likelihood that it's going to be transmitted from human to human increases substantially. And that's why, guess what? They're starting to say, you know what? We need to do something to prepare for this. And they're already starting to suggest more gain-of-function research. Can you believe it? Do we ever live in a clown world or what? On the Ukrainian war front, going back here, we got Belarus saying that, you know what? If we're attacked, then we might just have to join the war. And there's nothing that the Ukrainians would like more than Belarus to join the war, because if Belarus joins the war, it's almost guaranteed that the Baltics and Poland and likely NATO are going to invoke Article 5 or 4 and enter this conflict, because a destabilized Belarus is exactly what NATO would like at this point. Putin doesn't want Belarus to join the war, at least not officially. They want to just use it as a staging ground and pretend they're not supporting the war. We got droughts ravaging the interior continents of the planet. What else is new? Just more reason to prepare. We got all these Bradley and U.S. tanks and whatnots getting ready to put on rail, I believe, from Germany to, yeah, they're going to have to send it by rail the front line over there. Hopefully some of it makes it there before this grand offensive that we're told is coming. We got the Russians saying, you know what, this Nord Stream incident, we consider that an act of terrorism, international terrorism. And that warrants a complete, comprehensive, and independent investigation by the United Nations. The United States is not really paying attention to what the Russians are saying with respect to that. Remember, if you are deemed a terrorist state, then that's effectively another way of saying we're going to war with you. Now, as I've been told, there are many ways through many different clandestine channels an operation like this can be conducted without it being traceable back to any particular administration. So you could have covert ops guys who were paid by a person, who was paid by a person, who was paid by a person to do this, and maybe they had ties to Washington, according to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, who everybody is, once again, ignoring and saying went crazy. Because, you know, anybody who bucks the narrative clearly has lost their mind, right? I mean, it's only people who put out half-truths like the balloons are UFOs. Those are the only people we can take seriously. Anyways, what this means is that the war is absolutely intensifying and converging to a point where it appears as though NATO and Russia are on the brink of conflict, and that has been made evident by Sergei Lavrov basically saying that the West and East have reached a point of no return, according to their foreign minister. We have the United States telling their citizens to leave Russia immediately. The French are saying the same thing. The people in Belarus are shooting down balloons in Kiev. I mean, everything is just lining up. You got Victoria Nuland saying, yep, you know, you guys should strike Crimea just because, you know, why not? Why not get this party started a little bit quicker? And I'm not trying to be facetious and make light of the fact that people are dying in this conflict to the tune of, if you really believe the estimates of both sides, thousands a day, at least casualties in the thousands a day. But, you know, I mean, it's gallows humor, I guess, in order to get through the fact that this could potentially be coming to us all in the near future. We have in the Koreas, South Korea branding North Korea an enemy state. They're saying that now they've officially recognized North Korea as an official enemy state. This might seem obvious to a lot of people, but since 2016, they've actually retracted that designation, but now they're putting it back on them in light of all of the nuclear ICBM testing that the North is doing. And to make matters worse, South Korea and the U.S. on the same day are simulating drills on how they can defeat North Korea in a nuclear war. Let that sink in. The North Koreans and the South Koreans are preparing to go to nuclear war with one another. Last year, the United States altered their nuclear doctrine to allow for a preemptive strike. I'm starting to think that that alteration was geared towards the East more so than dealing with the Russians, because they know if they try that with the Russians, then everybody goes. Unfortunately, not everybody is going to go in that situation. Like we've talked about with many experts on this channel, nuclear war, unfortunately, is survivable. And I say unfortunately because, yeah, it's going to be a hellish, Mad Max, irradiated landscape, at least for a few weeks. And then you got the nuclear power plants that melt down after that, or the spent fuel rods that can't be maintained, and everything just goes to hell in a handbasket thereafter. And it would be a very challenging, bleak existence, a very desperate and longing existence. And, you know, depending on where you are on the map when it all happens, people say, well, I wouldn't want to survive. But the fact of the matter is, if you're alive and there's a good chance you're going to want to survive. It's not like, oh, the bombs went off and there's radiation everywhere, now I just want to die. No, there's a good chance that your survival instinct will be very vital, and you're going to want to survive, and you're likely going to be a drag on the system. So that's why you prepare. Japan is saying, you know what, we got balloons in our airspace too. If you didn't see our revelations about the Hainan stratospheric air base based out of China in the video I released a couple days ago, make sure you go and check that out. It explains a lot with respect to the use of stratospheric balloons in warfare. We go over all the details about what their limitations are and whatnot, so definitely go and check that video out. We have NATO concerned that the Russians have been doing all sorts of suspicious things lately with respect to strategic forces. So just the other day, they were doing a middle-of-the-night refueling. Apparently, they've never done night refueling before. I'm going to assume that because the United Air Force is more advanced, that they've done this before. But this is new for the Russians, and they were refueling anti-submarine aircraft. Do I have the details in front of me here? The crews of Tupolev Tu-142M3 anti-submarine warfare aircraft of the Pacific Fleet Naval Aviation conducted the first ever night aerial refueling. Now that in itself is not really a big deal, but when you pair that with all of the maneuver of their strategic forces, whether it's the tactical nukes on their warships or these close calls with the Alaskan airspace, 2 different incursions near Alaska. I should stop calling them incursions, but they're near flights with their nuclear bombers around Alaska within a span of 48 hours. That is something that doesn't happen that often. Typically, prior to 2015, these types of events where the U.S. had to scramble their own jets to intercept or escort or, just see what was going on were about 10 a year. Now they're about 60 a year, and this is the first time they've happened so close together. You also have nuclear submarines, of course, being put out to sea. Nothing really new necessarily there, but you have Russia's nuclear strategic program, which they've been investing in heavily. Then, of course, you have all the Chinese balloon stuff going on. So tensions are at an all-time high, which is why Charles Nenner, who's an acclaimed financial analyst, is saying that the war is going to pick up and gold is going to $30,000. Wouldn't that be something? If gold went to $30,000, boy, would there be blood in the streets. That's when you would definitely want a bunker to hide in, and hopefully nobody found the entrance or your little air pipe that sticks up. I think Ron over at Atlas Survival Shelters, he has ways that you can disguise it. So, if things get that bad, then man, it's going to be a challenging existence to say the least. Russia has issued a space warning. So not only are they worried about the stratosphere, they're also worried about space because the U.S. is going to be repurposing civilian space assets for military purposes. And the Russians are saying, no, you can't be doing this. We're going to potentially target those satellites if you choose to use them in such a way with our S-550 missile defense systems. And, or not missile defense, anti-satellite systems, which they demonstrated prior to the war in Ukraine. So we got a war developing in the stratosphere, another one developing in space, in cyberspace, and they're also now concerned greatly because of the whole Nord Stream thing that the United States swears they had nothing to do with or is just outright ignoring. They're worried about Russia attacking critical infrastructure under the sea. Okay, whether that's pipelines or these transatlantic cables, fiber optic cables that connect the two countries, the two continents together. So there's concern that this might be the next big play, is that we're going to start to see the Nord Stream stuff take shape outside. Now, we already know that these sorts of weird events have been happening in the Baltic states with pipelines blowing up. I think it's happened in Poland once. It's happened in Russia a lot of times. So we know that the war is starting to spread in a hybrid sort of sense outside. But I just want to briefly talk about why this situation is so untenable here, okay? And you guys might think, oh, I eat, sleep, and drink pessimism, and I just always plan for the worst. But believe it or not, I always try to play the devil's advocate, and I'm my own worst critic when it comes to, assessing, am I just being way too dark and pessimistic about my projections? Are things actually going to be much better and work out somehow? I cannot understand how an untenable situation, I'm going to say untenable a lot because that really is the best word to describe the war in Ukraine. we've put ourselves in a situation where even if there is a peace deal brokered, it's likely not going to be long-lasting or respected at all. It's just going to be a temporary armistice or détente of sorts, but it is not going to lead to a cessation of tensions, and it is likely just going to create a possibility for an even greater war in the future. Let me explain why. You see this map right now, and if you don't really know your geography too well, just understand that what the Russians are gunning for is basically this side of Ukraine. Ukraine is neatly divided in two geographical parts. Probably both are like comparable in actual area by the Dnipro River, Dnipro River, whatever they want to call it. I don't speak the language, so I'm not going to pretend to. But what the Russians are trying to do is effectively take all this, demilitarize Ukraine, and the conspiracy, even though conspiracies are batting a higher average than the mainstream nowadays, is that Poland's going to somehow come in here afterwards and do something. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that. I don't know enough about it. But that's what you're going to have. You're going to have this part of Ukraine be united with NATO, and this is going to be the Russians. And I think the Russians would probably, excuse me, might even be okay with that, because that gives them a nice barrier, you know, right butting up to Belarus there. They don't have to worry about this flank being opened up. So I think Putin would probably accept that. The problem is you're right at Kiev. And the problem is there's Ukrainians are never going to capitulate and concede this territory. If anything, Victoria Nuland is saying, no, target Crimea, which the Russians have said, this is a red line. If you fire here and target Crimea, much less take it over, we're going to light Ukraine on fire, and that's code for using nuclear weapons. But they've already been challenged in that respect. The Ukrainians have already targeted an air base in Crimea. They've targeted the bridge. They've overstepped all the red lines, and all Russia has done is stepped up the amount of airstrikes that they've done. Now, that is very significant, and they've definitely escalated. They brought in General Surovkin, General Armageddon. Then they put their second in command in charge, Yuri, I can't remember what his name is. So they're definitely intensifying their commitment to this conflict, but they haven't gone nuclear. So they haven't made good on these promises of, you know, what we're going to do if we cross the red line. But the reason why this situation is untenable, the West can't let Russia have this, because the Russians would then be a powerhouse. You're talking about a tripartite powerhouse of Belarus, this chunk of Ukraine, which will be incorporated into Russia now. People think, oh, Russia, everybody thinks of it. If you know a little bit about geography and demographics like me, you always envision Russia as the country with X amount of GDP and X amount of population. Well, now you've got to tack an extra 10, 20, 25, 30% onto that, because this is a very industrially rich region. And this may be that one domino that turns the tide of global financial hegemony in the world. I've talked about how the entire Western petrodollar system relies on the U.S. being the one sole economic superpower in the world. And Russia connecting their gas pipelines with Berlin would have potentially meant a more powerful Russia and United States losing its influence on Europe. And that would be the beginning of the end for people who like to shop at Walmart and people who've been conditioned to think that everything should just be cheap and available 24/7 at all times of the day. Well, we're quickly going to realize when the whole quadrillion derivative bubble bursts that life doesn't work that way for most people in the world. We are the golden billion, as Putin likes to call us. We are the ones who have it pretty good. You know, we're on the positive end of this whole globalization thing. I know that seems hard to believe, but if you live, even if you're on welfare, I think in the United States or Canada, you're in the top 10% of people in the world. So isn't that something to think about? Anyways, this is why even if the United States, even if Lukashenko and Biden and Putin met in Minsk and they signed a deal, you know, could you imagine, in light of everything that has transpired with the violation of the initial Minsk agreement and there being no trust, both sides would just use it as an opportunity to buy more time to build up their militaries. So unfortunately, war is an inevitable reality in the future. The only wild card that might sort this out is that if we get some common enemy, maybe AI or aliens, or, you know, I mean, really, because we're destined to try to sort this out. Either Russia wins and the American dollar loses, and, you know, we just learn to live in a bipolar world, which I don't think. I mean, we're probably not going to have a choice, to be brutally honest. The powers that be may push us into a nuclear conflict. You know, they may push us into that, or Russia loses and we potentially see a nuclear conflict. Those are really our options, at least, you know, as far as I can see it. Let me know if I'm being overly pessimistic, guys. And then, of course, you have this situation in the East, which in many people's books is more important than what's happening in the Russian-Ukraine war in terms of the race for global financial and geopolitical superiority. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly pessimistic. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I think we're going to put the brakes on this daily dose of doom and gloom for a couple days because we have a few videos that I would like to release in the next couple days that are of great importance when it comes to prepping. And I know nobody wants to do the hard work. Nobody wants to do the heavy lifting. We all just want to be told how bad it is. But you got to be pairing this type of stuff with doing stuff, you know, doing stuff towards the end of getting yourself in a better situation. And that could mean learning new things. That could mean just taking care of your body and your mind. That could mean taking on an extra job. And, you know, practically speaking, these are practical things that you can do towards being more prepared, is just getting everything that you can now while the getting is good. Because if you can't endure things when they're like this, as bad as you might perceive them to be, then you don't stand a hell of a chance of surviving when they really get bad. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.